Welcome back to the last session of the Punkt seminar. We are running 4.5 minutes late, and these boat people have to be on the boat 10 till 2, so we will make it all brief. We will now be able to listen to Havnevik, NOPA, Aslak Oppebøen, Music Norway, Torgny Amdam, som Moderator, Stian Westerhus, guitarist, and Henning Bolte, writer. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Welcome to Musikkforum, which is a monthly series in Oslo, arranged by the Composer Society, also Norsk Komponistforening, and NOPA, which is a society for composers and lyricists here in Norway. We're doing this Punkt edition about the Norwegian repertoire abroad, whatever that is. Norway is a well-off country, small, fairly egalitarian, a lot of cultural funding going on. We're also highly technological. How is Norwegian music doing out there in the big world? What works well? What can be better? What does not work at all? We're here to discuss this a little bit. We don't have all the time in the world, so I think we're just going to jump right in and start with you, Aslak Oppebøen. You're a project manager from Music Norway. Could you start by just tell us how you feel about the whole situation? How do you see things from your perspective working with musical export?
Does it work?
Yes, I work first of all mainly with jazz and folk and alternative music, but I also have, I know a little bit about the entire industry, and I would say it's very, I'm very optimistic, and it goes, rather well in most genres. We have names that are that the world wants, and people are touring a lot. We are supporting last year over 2,000 concerts abroad in 1 year. So it's a big activity, and we have big names within all genres, and our export is growing from year to year. We have every year a survey called Music in Numbers, which says that we are increasing our export numbers every year. So yes, I have to say I'm positive, and I think it's going good. And of course, what I want to point out is kind of a polarization in the industry, because the acts that we support, the bands that we support, we collect some numbers from them, for instance, fees. And we see that fees are increasing, but they are...
Live fees?
Live fees are increasing, but they are unevenly distributed. The bigger names get more, the small names get less. So I guess that's how the industry works and how the live market works. It's a more polarized situation, and even in recorded music and streaming, I think you can find the same. It's very hard for smaller artists. It's just the bigger artists that gets any revenue from streaming, and so it's a
mixed picture.
It's a mixed picture, yes.
What
do we have? I just wanted to say also we have 3 target markets. That's the US and Germany, and the UK. That's our primary.
Why are those the 3 primary
Because
markets?
that's where the artists want to go, and that's where the money, most of the income comes from artists. Yes.
Would you say Norway, what's different with Norway than, for example, Sweden and Denmark in terms of export? Is there anything you can mention?
Yeah, we have a much better system for supporting artist funds.
More money. Generally.
More money. To create a platform for artists to travel, travel support and ensemble support and project support, and so it's relatively much better system than in every other country in the world, I think. So that works as a platform. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it gives the people a possibility to travel and creating their networks. So.
Henning Bolte, you're a writer and a jazz critic. You're based in Amsterdam. You're both German and Dutch, as the way I understood it.
Yeah.
How do you look? How does Norway look to you from your perspective, from a Central European perspective? This weird country up north.
Yeah, I think I have to say that from a special role.
That's a thump. That's what I call a thump.
Okay. I fixed. No, it's gone. It's gone. I tried to fix it. Oh, it works. It works. It works. So my perspective is different from Aslak, and as a critic, I try to get into some special characteristics of the music made in Norway, and to explain it to people in other countries, other cultures. And you cannot transport one culture to the other culture. So you have to be sensitive to describe it, and also to initiate some collaboration between Dutch musicians and Norwegian musicians and German musicians and so on and so on. And that is the difficult point, because a lot of obstacles are rising in this discussion. I'm confronted very often with something like, oh, the Norwegians, they got all the money, and it's an angry reaction.
And you're not even a member of the EU, and you have all the money.
You have all the money, and you take away our jobs, our gigs, and so on and so on. And oh, they have the oil money, and so on and so on. So then I have to answer that the money is never first. The culture is the first thing, and if you have money, it helps. But it's a hard thing to convince people that Norwegian musicians and Norwegian music is not about oil and a lot of money. But every time I'm confronted with that. On the other hand, I would like to bring over some of the firm and very productive characteristics of Norwegian music. I organized some Punkt thing in Amsterdam, and it was not easy because it's also threatening.
It's also threatening?
Threatening, because one of the characteristics of Norwegian musicians and Norwegian scene is openness and listening to other musicians without fear. And that's a special characteristic, special trait. And for me, it's still not difficult, but I still try to learn how it comes, that this openness is there, and also this listening is there without fear losing your identity, without falling out of the club you are a member of. But that's different from other places and other scenes. And it's difficult, and I experienced that in Amsterdam, to get a strong Amsterdam scene connected with the Punkt musicians. So the Punkt musicians are so open that it's, you could say, the more open they are, the more it's threatening for
more dangerous.
The more dangerous it is. And yeah, you can help it a little bit, but it's a long process.
This openness is essentially very positive, right?
It's positive, and it's, from my position, for me, I try to bring it over as something which you don't have to immediately adopt, but learn from it. It's a little bit, I was thinking about, it's a little bit like when American musicians like Don Cherry and so on came to Scandinavia and told people, go to your own roots. And that's the same with the Norwegian musicians doing a lot of work, advanced work. And it's not a question of copying that. It's a question of applying it to your own situation. And I hope that will be a productive process. And it can help when you collaborate, musicians. There are some Belgian and Dutch, Norwegian collaborations, and I can see that it works really well. Because these Belgian musicians and also Dutch musicians, they keep their own identity and develop it in connection with the Norwegian musicians. But when I may add that, this openness has another side. And the other side is that it's, in a way, very closed, the Norwegian scene.
What do you mean by that?
I mean by that, and it's also based on personal experience. If you look at Norwegian labels, and you try to find musicians not from Scandinavia, you have to search for a very long time. And you will find a few, but that's crazy in a way. Because it's so few and it's so difficult for people to get in there. And I'm wondering what the reason is. It's not blaming people for that, but just stating that there's this openness and there's at the same time this closed farm of closed village in a way.
That's interesting. Openness, closeness, collaboration. Let's get back to that. Havnevik, you're an artist. You're essentially from the pop. You work with electronic pop music these days. You have a background in jazz. You've been singing on Røyksopp's records. You've been touring with Air. You've been living abroad in London for a long time, and also in the U.S. As a Norwegian artist outside of Norway, living outside of Norway, how was it like being this Norwegian-ness? Was this a big deal at all, or was this something that people talked about?
Well, I do think that people find it exotic that you're from Scandinavia, and then but you also need to have something that appeals to them, I guess. But I never saw it as a big advantage, but it was a plus in a way. It was kind of interesting if people did take an interest in the music, and then they thought, oh, she's Norwegian, that's exciting. They have, especially in the States, I think they have a kind of a romantic idea of Scandinavia, some sort of Lord of the Rings film, you know, like sort of like all these old stories and these mountains, and they all come from somewhere in Europe, most of them. So they have they all come and say, "Oh, my granddad was Norwegian," or you know, things like that. So I think the music comes first, and then if it reaches through, then it can become exciting that you're from, you know, Norway or somewhere. But you know, it needs to be something before that grabs the attention.
I think this concept of national identity, think about Björk, think about Sigurd Ros, you know, the knitted sweaters and this Icelandic accent. I mean, it's very integral, it's an integral part of their music. And I saw you nodding, Henning. You're like the Norwegianness, the Scandinavianness. It has this aura, this mystique. Look at Norwegian black metal, how powerful that whole mythology is. Like,
I don't like this myth anymore.
You don't like this myth anymore?
No, because it's becoming a cliche, and you have to fight against this cliche and its romanticism in a bad way. So I try to spin myself and say that it's music from Norway. And so music from Norway is so different, and that connects to the openness, that it's so different, and it's not the ECM sound, which is also some very artificial thing, and it's going on for a longer time now, and I try to get people more into seeing the whole picture and seeing the history and the culture, which connects to some of these elements. But it's not so easy to pinpoint what connects with what. There's a special quality, that's no doubt. It's not, you cannot find that in other countries in that strong form. But I try to get it out of the cliché.
Doesn't it have a little bit to do with mood as well, just like mood and personality, I think. Just it's individual. I mean, I'm more from pop music, and I mean, a lot of Norwegian pop music is it's very accessible, but it still has that little sort of uniqueness in a way. I think that appeals.
Stian Westerhus, you're a composer, guitar player. We saw your remix yesterday. You're going to play live today. You've been involved with Monolithic, great, hard-hitting rock duo. I don't even know how to describe it. You're a solo artist, out with your own record, pretty recent. To you as an alternative artist and composer, you've also toured with Yaga Assist and several others. Norway alone is not enough for you because it's such a small country, and I mean, you have your eyes on the world, right? As far as touring, as far as having an audience.
Yes.
How do you deal with that? Is that a blessing or a curse?
I get your point, but it's of course, like if you have being a Norwegian musician in Norway is a two-edged sword, or it has more edges than you can count swords actually. But your question about being a Norwegian musician traveling abroad, I mean, it just goes without saying. I mean, I could do, maybe if I really wanted to, I could do 10 concerts a year in Norway. You know, I'd flood the market then. I couldn't come back next year. So I need the sort of German market with 80 million people, and I need, you know, we all need to travel abroad. It just goes without saying. But I think that, like, the discussion that goes with these kind of things, it's like a polarization of this sort of idea of nationality. I really don't subscribe to that. I think it's BS, to be honest. I think that whole sort of stigma of being like from Norway is this kind of music, it doesn't really work like that. I mean, I lived for 5 years in London. It was great. When I came back, just the shock of just, there's 5 million people here, there's nobody here. It's so easy to make things happen here. It's great, you know, you can do things, you can have support. That side of things, like the way the Norwegian system works, is that it really creates a lot of creative individuals that have enough time to sort of create their own aesthetics and to suck in everybody else's aesthetic. And I think that's, you know, of course, part of what comes out of Norway as a sort of Norwegian individuality, which is quite contradictory in terms, but it's. I think this whole sort of
But isn't that a good thing, though? That's a good thing.
Yeah. I don't mean to be, you know, disrespectful to myself or anybody else, but it's just like Henning says, you know, just the way that, especially like with jazz music, the way it's been sort of subscribed to as being a part of like the ECM sound, or like the Norwegian sound, and how Norwegian improvised music sounds and stuff like that. It's so much more diverse than that, and of course it's a selling point to a point, but to a point as well. I don't necessarily always want to be a Norwegian musician. or a Norwegian artist, it sort of also has its limitations. There's of course a sort of a luxury limitation to it, but the whole sort of I think it's a bit toffee-nosed, if you know the expression, like
Yes.
you know,
Right, so
it's like
nationalism.
it does feel a bit like nationalism sometimes, and especially the us and them thing. That's 1989, man. It's just so old. And just to quote Erling Aksdal, who works at the Jazz Academy in Trondheim, he was asked like from panel discussion in the US, and it was like one of those openings. So, Mr. Erling Aksdal, what do you think about how will the Norwegian mountain jazz? What will the mountain jazz bring out to the world now? How is this gonna last? Just this sort of ECM, younger Baraki, and he's just like, if you think that's what we're doing, that's your problem. It's just like, oh well, because I mean, if you look at just the amount of really great musicians that comes out of Norway at a certain point it just stops being Norwegian and it just becomes this whole sort of own spare traveling, well, like Paul Nilsson Love, who's sort of quite possibly the biggest jazz drummer in the world at the moment. He does 250 gigs a year and he has been for like 10 years now. It's absolutely insane what he's doing. Nobody in the world is doing that. And you would never think that what he's doing is like Norwegian, because it's not subscribed to in that way. You know what I mean?
But at the same time,
Maybe he is able to do this just because he's from Norway, because of the funding, because of the support system and within the Norwegian jazz scene, etc.
Of course, but that's funding. And if funding is nationality, then that's a completely different discussion, I think. Because I don't mean to say I don't subscribe to the funding thing. I mean, look at me, I'm full of funding. It's a bit dirty at the moment, but it'll get shinier. But I think it's I think it's a little bit naive, the Norwegian scene, in the way that it thinks of itself as so individual and so rich of culture and all this stuff. I mean, we're really good at having these kind of people who help us bring it out to the world, and Norwegian artists have become very professionalized, which is great. But if we talk about like the Norwegian artists and the way of doing music, like, at least from where I come from, where it's like I have too much jazz education. That whole sort of the way that jazz and improvised music and new music has evolved, I think there is certainly a product of the Norwegian jazz scene or the music scene in Norway, is that many musicians in Norway have a very common way of thinking music, like how music works. What are the bricks that make up our music? How does music work? How does aesthetics work? What is quality? And that sort of more sort of a scene that thinks music in the same way, I think is sort of the source of at least the sort of crowd that I am involved in and have been for the last 15 years. It's more sort of a common understanding of what music is, which is almost like an art school, an art direction, more than anything else.
Freed from the commercial restraints, or freed from thinking commercially?
No, has nothing to do with commerciality or anything, but it has to do with how you play and how you think about aesthetics in playing, and how you sort of manage music. I mean, you're down to like the small bits in music, how music works, and
The political implications of a certain EQ setting, right?
well, like I recently did me and Arve Henriksen, who was also here at the festival. We did a collaboration with some Belgian and French musicians last year, and even though you would think that it would be very similar to going into a similar setting like in Norway with like a drummer and a Rhodes player, it was so different because they have such a different understanding of their aesthetics and just the whole sort of musical aesthetics.
Can you very briefly try to give an example of, could you give an example? How?
No.
It's too hard. Then we need all day.
It's like, this is the part of music which is just really hard to describe. It has to be played. Yeah. And it's one of those things that this is the actual essence of why Sitzel Endresen sounds like she does, why Super Silent sound like they do. I mean, it's one of those things where you just feel like, whether it has, you can sort of tick the boxes, but those boxes are really hard to describe.
But it comes from Norway.
I don't know where it comes from, but it definitely is a school of aesthetics in Norway, which has evolved through being a very diverse pool of musicians that have done a very, very wide reference work of music, I think.
Kat, let's try to talk a little bit about the pragmatics of getting your music out there as an artist. I know that you don't tour as much now, but you're very concerned with your online presence. You were, you know, when MySpace was the go-to place in 2008 or whatever for the music industry. Isn't that funny? MySpace were supposed to be the savior of the music industry. You had such a huge MySpace following, and after that, you've been very active with crowdfunding. How is that in terms of communicating with the world, online presence?
Well, it's been really good. I mean, the whole MySpace thing kind of, I guess, kind of exploded because I got one of my songs in Grey's Anatomy, and then I had the attention of everyone who was watching that show. I was in every living room in the States. So that opened a lot of doors, and because they continued to use my songs like 9 times, then that sort of audience became very aware of my music. And I think that had nothing to do with being Norwegian. It was just basically the music was suitable for the show, for the scenes, and it struck a chord with the audience. And I was living in London as well. So the thing is, like, I moved to England before I actually started my music career. So in Norway, I always felt a bit like, you know, I was never really able to become part of the club, even though I was Norwegian. So it became really important for me to have that online presence and that sort of direct communication with the fans, which kind of started blossoming a bit. And I had friends in London who were artists and who were doing that, like Imogen Heap, who is very, very good at that, you know. So I had all this different inspiration of seeing how it worked. And I became more part of this sort of kind of indie scene in the States, you know, touring with lots of other singer-songwriters. We had the same type of audience, but by touring together, we could share the audience. And I was always the only foreign person. They were all Americans, maybe one British, and then me. And I don't know how I ended up in that sort of setting, but I think it just had to do with getting my music in the right places and just getting an audience. And then following up, basically, and keeping it warm, keeping it going.
2 questions. Do you have publishing now?
Right now, I don't.
Do you have your own label?
Right now, I'm a free soul.
You're freed from the chains of your own publishing?
Yeah. No, I have my own company, which is basically just me and my various distribution deals and you know, things I can use if I want to.
So you're not on a foreign label now?
No.
I know you were signed to a major label internationally, but
yeah, I was with Universal Republic in the States for my first record, and then I was with Zamba Music Publishing who was sold and bought a million times and ended up being Imagine Publishing. But now I'm free to explore new possibilities of how to make a living as a musician.
And you, Stian, you put out your last album on House of Mythology, was run by Chris from Ulver, who used to have Jester Records. It's a Norwegian independent company. Just picking up on what Henning said about foreign artists, they don't get signed to Norwegian labels. Was it a conscious decision to keep it local? To have a Norwegian label? Would you want a foreign label, ideally? Do you have any thoughts?
I was originally going to release on Touch, which is a British label that releases like Finnish and things like that. And after a while we realized that the stuff I wanted to put out wasn't really suitable, and we didn't agree basically. But which I'm very happy about, because dealing with the local guys is, of course, it's so much easier and it's so much faster, and it's great to do that. Yeah.
How is that for you as a foreigner in this setting? How do you discover new Norwegian artists? Is it through credible labels like ECM blah blah blah, or do you research independent labels in Norway, or how does it work?
No, I just avoid labels.
Full mailbox.
Yeah, full mailbox. So it's more being traveling and talking with musicians, and then picking up some interesting project, and then band members, and then you go to the next and next and next. So it's an individual line.
You're essentially saying that you discover more artists through a live setting.
Yeah. But live. I most of the time I'm traveling and going to live concerts, so I've no time really to listen in a concentrated way, and that's a practical thing, but it sets you to thinking about all this canned music, because it's a nice thing that you can music.
You can what?
Can. You can put it in cans.
Canned
music.
Preserve.
Preserved canned.
Oh, as in
In a can.
But the live thing is so much more worthwhile to follow, and
because
you have the real experience, and that's the main thing. So the recording is something which is nice if you cannot travel, or if you are busy with other things, and you can retreat in your house. But the live music is for me the essential thing. And I'm also writing mostly about live concerts.
Aslak, how do you, from your perspective, I mean, the live situation that's where most artists make any money at all.
But I just wanted to comment on Henning's, because one of the most important tools that we have is to try to follow up the openness of the genre-wise that Norwegian musicians have, also to have openness to foreigners coming to Norway, and we have a really huge program for inviting people to come to Norwegian festivals and creating platforms and network situation, meet and greet, and become friends with people, and that's one of the most important things we can do.
So
exporting
not
the
only
music.
Exporting Norwegian artists out, also getting other foreign artists.
Yeah,
in.
because that helps. Like Henning's been to Norway a lot, he knows the scene. So it's instead of just sending CDs to people, meeting people is the essential thing in export work, and we try to encourage the Norwegian industry to meet the foreign industry in these meetings, and also include the artists, like do-it-yourself artists, which is a lot in our genres, to meet the international press and the industry. So that's really basic thing that we do, and And we don't, just also to say that we don't focus on Norway necessarily. Sometimes Norway works, sometimes Norway doesn't really work at all. Depends on the artist and how, and the receiver in the other end. So somebody wants the Nordic Norway thing, somebody would just want an artist, and yeah, it's not important.
It's always important to figure out what is unique with the music and how it's being played and everything, and it might have nothing to do with where you're from, so yeah, it can be used on purpose, of course, but it can also be, it doesn't have to be any advantage.
Yeah, I think a lot of music, if I wouldn't know that it is Norwegian, I would choose it without knowing it. And the same applies to music from male or female artists. So you have this filter, Norwegian, and it's a strong filter, and it helps sometimes, but sometimes it's also an obstacle.
We're kind of short on time, but I just want to ask you briefly, Stian, what does not work with the Norwegian repertoire abroad? What can be better? How do you see from your struggling artist perspective? Your funded up your ass perspective.
That's a short little question you got from me there, Torgny. Thank you very much for that.
Are you? Yeah. Are you? Is there anything you're missing in terms of the whole infrastructure around your work? Going out there.
Time. It's the biggest. No, but there's always going to be shortcomings when it comes to infrastructure in getting new music out, I think. And like we talked about professionalization earlier, which has also been a huge thing with, I guess, with Music Norway, and earlier there's been loads of discussion with like professionalizing the sort of management aspects of getting music out and stuff like that. Norway has a long way to go there, because there's also, Norway's very small, so it's sort of an inbred community, and there's also the chances of like this really nice thing where they invite journalists to come to Norway. There's also an aspect of that whole scene sort of getting quite inbred after a while, and I think that's one of the it's been a really nice thing, that where you sort of get to know a lot of the European scene through that, but it's also the aspect of where do we go from there, because it's like last 10 years I've toured Europe so many times in the same clubs, and the whole sort of aspect of, I'm not complaining because it's great, but just trying to get out of that as well, just to try and sort of like Bolte says as well, like you find it becomes dangerous for this other communities to touch into this, because it's you sort of buy into this sort of aspect of how you sell your music, you know what I mean? And that's what I think is really dangerous with this whole sort of Nordic thing, that it can actually be quite limiting as well in the ways that you can sort of cross over to other scenes or more venues. I mean, there's 3,000 jazz festivals in Europe every year. It's crazy, and I think I play like 20 of them. You know, it's not to say that I fit into anything else, but it's just like this is always like you always have to go through the numbers when it comes to this, like how you brand it. If you start using money on this, I think, like, which community do you want to create with spending money on this, and what do you want to use it for? I think that's the big in my eyes, that's the big double-edged sword. Like, which road do you want to go down? Because it doesn't necessarily lead that many ways, you know. But I don't know if that's an answer to your question.
Thank you. We have time for one question, if there's anyone who.
I just want to say we have to say that Punkt is really a good example of the openness and traveling around, inviting local cooperating with local artists, and that's I think a way to go forward. Really great.
Yeah.
That's why Punkt.
That's
great.
that's very important because people know that Punkt is Norwegian, but the Norwegianness is not emphasized. It's just a connecting of scenes in Europe, and you can make your advantage with being a Norwegian, but you don't have to flag it too much, and then it will work. And Paul Needs and Love, I think, is a good example. He connects to so many, too much things, but it works. It works. It works in a productive way, liberating. In a way, and giving new impulses. And there are some other musicians on this route, and I think this is a route for the future.
So the conclusion is, Punkt is awesome. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for this edition of Musikkforum, special edition for Punkt and Kristiansand. This concludes this